I think I'll take you up on presenting and try to do that because it's midnight right now, so I'll try not to fall asleep, but I'm gonna be good. Do you see my slides right now, or do you see a weird screen? It's all good? All right, perfect. So, hello everyone. My name is Irem. I am from Wayne State University, and I will talk about consequences of unethical firm behavior to you today. What I looked at specifically is how do consumers evaluate local brands and global brands that behave unethically. My co-author is Dr. Yaprak from Wayne State University as well. Okay, so let's get on with my study. So we know that consumers react when they learn that there is a corporate wrongdoing going on. And they react either to show their disappointment or their ended support, or to organize others to show disappointment and end others' support. In this paper, we theorize and empirically test the effects of corporate wrongdoings on consumer retaliatory intent and the moderating effect of perceived brand globalness and perceived brand localness. So first of all, what do we mean by corporate wrongdoings? This word comes up in literature as corporate crises, brand wrongdoings, unethical corporate behavior, and at the end of the day, they more or less refer to the same thing, which is extraordinary critical events in a company's life that may lead to consumers' physical or psychological harm, financial loss, and or environmental damage. And they can, so like there can be three different wrongdoings. We can categorize them in three different levels. The first level is actions that violate the ethics of divinity, which is basically impurity or degradation of the person, other persons, or objects, and this can be extended to nature. So the firm can be using toxic pollutants, toxic ingredients, or polluting the nature, or basically using ingredients that are harming other people. This would be violation of the ethics of divinity. The second category that the corporation can be doing something wrong is the violation of the ethics of the community. And this happens when a person fails to carry out his or her duties within a community or to the social hierarchy within the community. So if a corporation is not paying their taxes or are selling unlawful products or promoting their products unlawfully, then this would be violation of the ethics of the community. Third, the company can be violating the ethics of autonomy, and this happens when they hurt or infringe the rights of freedom of other people and or the society. So if a firm is conducting human rights violations or is sourcing from a company that does child labor, etc., this will be the violation of the ethics of autonomy. Having covered that three different groups, let me just give you two examples that are really well known in the industry and also in academia. Volkswagen, for example, admitted that it sold 11 million diesel vehicles in the world that were equipped with a defeat device, so they were contributing to the pollution in the world. And then another scandal that I want to talk to you about is the PR crisis of H&M. H&M put this photo in Instagram, also on their website, of this black child wearing the shirt that says "coolest monkey in the jungle." It blew up worldwide, and this was H&M writing something racist and violating human rights. So they took it down, they apologized, but it didn't recuperate as well as they wanted it to. So those are the two different examples where a corporation is conducting a wrongdoing, and as you can see, it can be very different from each other. Polluting the environment is not very similar to violating human rights, but in other levels it is similar because they're both wrongdoings. So what is told to us in the literature so far? Consumers react both cognitively, evaluatively, and emotionally when they learn there is a corporate wrongdoing. There are several papers out there that talk about moral emotions and how when consumers learn that a corporation is doing a wrongdoing, consumers start feeling contempt, anger, disgust. Contempt and anger are more related to the violations of autonomy and community, and then disgust is more often than not related to the violation of divinity. And then also, we have observed that corporate wrongdoings do have an effect on perceived corporate greed of consumers. It does lead to lower attitudes. It does lead to lower purchase intentions from the brand. It does lead to negative word of mouth, and it does lead to boycotting intentions. There is also some evidence to how brand country of origin or product country of origin impacts this relationship between brand wrongdoing and consumers' reactions to it. So there's two examples I want to give to you. Zhu, Leng, and Yan find that the perceived warmth of a company's corporate country of origin increases consumers' willingness to give the company a second chance. Barbarossa, De Pelsmacher, and Moons demonstrate that country warmth significantly reduces the attribution of a blame to a foreign company involved in a product harm crisis, whereas country competence has no impact. So warm countries compared to competent countries seem to have different effects on consumers' perceptions on the corporate wrongdoings. Stemming from that, coming to our paper, we want to look at what the difference of perception among consumers across two different groups, two different products that are global and products that are local. We theorize that there will be a difference between the global brands and perceived brands conducting wrongdoings, and then the consumers reacting to these. So to test this, we run an online experiment on subjects that are students at a large Midwest university. We design a 2x2 between subjects experimental design, and in the experimental group, respondents read a synopsis of a local or a global apparel company who was found to be sourcing raw materials from a factory that actively was employing child labor. And then in the neutral group, respondents read a very similar synopsis with no traces of child labor or unethical practices. So this is one of our scripts that one group of our respondents read. It's an imaginary brand. It's not a real brand that we're using, just to keep that brand perceptions that may be present from the past out of the equation for now. So our local company, we say, was founded here. It has this many employees, and they were found to supply their materials from a company, a factory that employs children, and they don't say anything. When confronted by a local news source, management shrugged off the accusations. And then the rest of the I'm not going to show you all of them, but so after that manipulation, we measure the means of the groups, and we see that yes, attitudes for both groups decrease once the company is involved with child labor. However, the decrease is much steeper when it's a global company compared to when it's a local company. And then similarly, this is the result for attitudes. And then similarly for purchase intentions from that company, the purchase intentions has a steeper curve for global case, where purchase intentions decreased to 1.6 for the global brands, and for the local brands it decreases less. So our results say that consumers do punish global brands more compared to local brands when they learn that they are doing something wrong or when they're conducting an unethical action. We demonstrate that consumers both react with decreased attitudes towards the brand as well as lower purchase intentions once they learn once they're aware of the unethical practices by the brand or the company. Um, our results guide us pretty well. Theoretically, this area has not been looked at, the intersection between perceived brand globalness and the perceptions after a company does anything unethical. So we open the door to explore a new area in terms of how they interact. And we're also aware that our study is very, very limited and small at this point, but we wanted to basically see if there is an effect, see if consumers are reacting differently to global and local brands. And our study shows that yes, they do. So we have more road to cover, more road to go right now. But with these results, we see that brands that are global and brands that employ global branding strategies do need to be more careful in terms of their unethical doings or choices, because once discovered, the backlash from the consumers about the brands that are global committing unethical practices is worse than their reaction to the local brands. Beyond avoiding unethical choices, which we do recommend to global brands also need to audit the practices of their partners, providers in their supply chain or the companies that they work with, and ensure that whomever they encounter market exchanges with also are equally responsible towards humanity and natural resources. And we also want to note that in the modern information era, any unethical partner information is likely to be discovered soon. Hence, there are advantages to collaborating with partners that are ethical. And lastly, global brands should take steps to gain awareness, sympathy, positive attitudes, and popularity across their consumer markets by being explicit and loud about no harm and fairness policies if they do employ them, and probably also should be frank about anything that is not very ethical with their practices. Going forward, we want to observe who these consumers are that punish global brands, because we suppose that we may see some interaction effects in terms of certain types of consumers that care possibly more about the preservance of nature and society. Secondly, we want to see if this effect is generalizable to all types of unethical behavior. I spent a big chunk of the first part of the presentation talking about all those three different types of unethical behavior. We only looked at child labor, so we want to at least do 2 more studies on the other 2 types of unethical behavior. And then we also want to see how these effects come across. So what are the pathways that consumers take in terms of their thought process or emotional processes that they actually react worse for the global brands' unethical doings. Yeah, and then lastly, it would be interesting to look at across cultures whether this is a common reaction to global brands compared to local brands. Thank you so much, and I can take any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you very much, Irem. I think once or twice I mispronounced your name. It was not intended as a microaggression. It happens to me all the time, even in writing, so apologies.
That's fine.
Really interesting presentation, and actually I have a few questions, but I would let Pei ask hers if she has any.
Go on. I don't have questions.
All right. Well, first, a rather technical question. You briefly explained your experiment. What was your manipulation check?
Our manipulation check was like asking whether the brand, the product is from a global brand or a local brand. So this was a question that popped up after they read the scenario, and we wanted the participator to basically go back in memory and tell us if it's a global company that they're looking at or if it's a local company that they're looking at.
Okay. And you showed us one of the scenario descriptions, and it seemed that the scenario did not only contain the transgression, but also the firm response to the transgression. I think you mentioned the firm shrugged off the accusation.
Yes.
So a further manipulation. So instead of having a 2 times 2, you could expand it to a 2 times 2 times 2 design by manipulating the response to shrugging off. In this day and age, obviously, is an ill-advised response. The more likely, the more appropriate response would be to take some blame or to promise to resolve the issue. Simply shrugging off an accusation is not what many smart companies would do today, I would assume.
Yeah, that's a good advice because believe me, I wanted to put it in there to make the negativity of the effect present, to make it more negative. But that's a great idea. To be honest, it didn't come to my mind, and I think that's a great manipulation to add.
Okay. Your findings suggest that customers don't take lightly when global companies misbehave relative to local companies. What's your explanation for that finding?
That's, I mean, my explanation will be very basically I kind of actually put it in the paper too, but I don't have data for it, let's say. So I think that for local companies, consumers try to make them prosper, so they give them excuses in terms of either, oh, they're small, or they don't have the resources to do everything ethically. So like local companies are perceived as small and vulnerable, let's say. And the perception, I conducted a couple of focus groups to see how consumers belong with the rest of the world, independent of this paper. But in those focus groups, what came up was that consumers tried to buy from local brands, other thinking otherwise local brands are going to disappear. So they always think that global brands are stronger, they have more money, they have more means to anything, they can take a punch, even if they lose money to be more ethical, like they can take it. So I think that's the mentality that goes behind the scenes. But I want to try to measure this so that, I think this is a good mediator, honestly, at the end of the day. And I think if I can measure this, local companies cannot take a punch, but global companies can take a punch idea, I think that's the thought process. But this is my proposal, let's say. Do you have an
Okay.
idea too?
Well, it sounds very, very, very compelling. And yes, I do have an idea, and I have absolutely no idea if it's any truer than what you just explained. One of the examples you used was Volkswagen.
Yeah.
I happen to live 50 miles from the Volkswagen headquarters in Wolfsburg, Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, the diesel scandal is still big news where I live. I was actually one of the victims because I had an Audi that was greatly diminished in value in no time because people perceived it to be one of the cars affected by the cheating. But I think we're more forgiving of transgressions of local companies because we know that they are inextricably connected to our well-being, to our local economy. So if I join a protest, a boycott of Nike, I know it will hurt stockholders in the United States or jobs somewhere in Far East Asia. If I jump onto the bandwagon and start criticizing Volkswagen and demand punishment, I'm quite likely to hurt my neighbor's job prospects. I'm quite likely to undermine the tax revenues of the town I live in. So I think it's far closer to home and more likely that it would actually negatively impact the livelihoods of people I know and the community I live in. So perhaps that could be a motivation or a reason why um, I'm more forgiving of local transgressions.
That's yeah. I definitely agree. I think there's also that. That's a very good theory. And I'm sorry that you had to get a punch in the diesel crisis and be harmed, but I hope that recuperated itself. Did your car's value get back or anything?
No,
I'm sorry.
I sold it and I sold it and downsized, but I became a brand switcher. So that was my way of punishing Volkswagen.
Mm-hmm.
On this note, if you perhaps allow me one further question or comment.
Of
Um,
course.
in the beginning, when you outline your literature basis, you also mentioned research that looked at the country of origin effect. And um, my perception is that very often country of origin is discussed, or a country of origin is framed positively, like made in Germany stands for quality, made in Turkey makes the product perhaps more exotic,
Yeah.
um, made in Israel makes it more high tech and um, um, an example of great software made in China makes it state of the art technology wise, etc., etc. But in my experience, there's also consumer antagonism towards certain countries. So now let's use an extreme example. I think the original SodaStream water maker um, was developed in Israel, I think even in the occupied territories. So um, how would a Palestinian respond to a SodaStream brand transgression versus a comparative brand from the US or from Canada or from Germany? I think some consumers, some countries carry baggage, which will then influence their response to a corporate crisis.
Yeah, I did not look into that. And I definitely think there is that, but like that was not really the main idea of this study. I also got some feedback in terms of like perceived brand globalness and perceived brand localness, and that's what I measure because like I actually didn't know that SodaStream was from Israel. I think it was more of a maybe American brand, or because a lot of Americans use it. But that's why I try to measure people's perceived localness versus globalness, because I got the feedback that Volkswagen can be local for Germans, but to the rest of the world maybe it's more global, etc. So instead of the country of origin itself, I am trying to look at how consumers perceive it. Hagen Dazs, for example, is the example I give in all of my classes when I'm teaching anything related to country of origin, because everyone says, oh, it's Danish or it's Swedish. No, it's American. And they just try to create this perception around this brand being from somewhere else. And so country of origin effects sometimes stay limited, especially nowadays when a lot of things are not made in the countries the things originated from. Like Apple goes with designed in California, but made in probably China or somewhere in Asia, but they say designed in California. Like they try to still take that perceived brand origin effect into. It's things, but I look at consumers' perceptions for that sense. And I actually think that if there is antagonism, it could come across in that measurement of localness versus globalness. And I see that Dr. Yaprak wrote a note in the chat too. I'm not sure how to read it. Oh, I think I figured it out. So I'm like, I would like to read that too, or maybe he would like to comment on this.
Consumer antagonism may also be culturally determined. This is why replication of the study of different cultures will be an important contribution. Yes, that would be great if you collected additional data. I think it's a really cool topic, and on SodaStream, I think they've been taken over by PepsiCo a few years ago.
Yeah.
It was just an example from the top of my head. I traveled to certain countries where people of a certain generation told me they refused to buy German cars because of the war. I think that attitude will disappear, but it was still there, and they felt very strongly about it.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that there are pockets of consumers that will react more negatively if they know that the transgressor originated from a certain country.
Yeah, and as you said, there's a lot of purchases, like, I think Cadbury was bought out. So, like, it's actually really hard to track out where the origin is from. And perceived brandness versus globalness simplifies that chaos of brands, like being from here, but then being bought by this other person and being bought by this other person. So, yeah, I think your ideas are very, very relevant, and thank you for all the feedback.
Well, thank you guys for the excellent presentation.
Yeah.
And it's a pity that the fourth presenter didn't make it. I think it would have nicely rounded off this session. And since I'm based in Germany, I'm not shy to apply stereotypes. Punctuality is very important, and